Should we wait for somebody to hop on?
No, just go.
Just go? But then people are gonna miss it. Kind of. Hello, people that will probably be watching this after the live. But the beginning's the most important part. Oh well. Just kidding. Okay, well, if nobody hops on, that's all good. Hey look, somebody. Hello! Okay, well then, okay, we'll just start then. Awesome. So, tonight, we wanted to share, I don't know where to look. We've got 2 cameras going on, but it's okay. I'll look at this one. Okay, so tonight we wanted to talk about video games and relationships and kind of share our story with it and how we've come a long way in making sure that video games aren't a problem in our marriage. So to start from the very beginning, when we first got married, Nick was in school full time and was working after school and would get home at like 7 or 8, depending on if he biked home. And so he'd get home really late, and then by that point it was like homework and dinner and just a lot of craziness. And so he would get home, and a lot of the time he would hop on and play video games with his brother. So he'd play online with them. They'd all get on and play. And sometimes he'd just get on and play by himself. And that really, really ticked me off. Like, it bothered me so much because I was like, no, like, you gotta spend time with me. Like, why aren't you spending time with me? Like, it's late. I was home all day by myself, wasn't I? For the most part. Because I was doing school online. And I only worked like 3 days out of the week. And so by the time he got home, I was like, no, it's my time to spend with you. So it really, really bothered me. And I would get really frustrated with him and with myself. Because I was like, well, I knew he liked playing video games. And before we even got married, I told myself I wouldn't marry somebody that played video games all the time because I hated them. I thought they were dumb and pointless and time consuming and brain damaging, and just thought they were terrible. I had which is funny because my brother and my dad played. I would play some video games. But I think because the culture and the idea, especially like at the end of high school and into college, guys that played video games was just not an attractive thing, right? Like, a lot of women in society don't want that in a man. And I kind of followed along, and I was like, they're dumb. So it caused a lot of problems. And it caused some disagreements and some contention and a lot of hurtful evenings of me going to bed upset and angry at him, which was not okay. So that's where this all began, and it sucked. So your point of view from it.
So first off, how many people agree with Mackenzie on this, or feel similarly towards video games, like they just really have no value and just distract from people being constructive members of society?
Just comment, wave, if you've ever looked at video games in that kind of light. They'll comment.
So like Kenzie said, I think it's not uncommon for people to feel similarly. Yeah, we're getting some agreement there. And the first thing that I would point out, certainly, is that, yes, Kenzie said that there was some hurt feelings and some uncomfortable evenings, but for the most part, she didn't say it. She didn't bring it up. She didn't say anything. She was hurt, but she didn't want me to be hurt, I guess. But, of course, you can't hide something like that in a marriage. So that's also what caused a lot of the problems. And just as a general relationship advice, at that point, I was probably guilty of something. I was guilty of contributing to this negative situation, but so was Mackenzie.
Yeah.
And if she had not have also recognized that, because we talked about it, we got over it. That's why we're doing this. Is because we were able to come to a compromise and figure things out. And if Kenzie had not had been willing to admit that she was also contributing to some degree to this negative situation, she would not have been willing to compromise. We never would have gotten through it, and it probably would have just gotten worse, led to more hurt feelings, and escalated.
Well, with that, I just assumed that he knew and understood that I didn't like video games and that he shouldn't be playing video games. I almost kind of mentally was putting it all on him to figure it all out on his own, that he needed to stop playing. But I wasn't really communicating that. I was just kind of, I thought, I don't know what I was thinking at the time, but I was just hoping that he would just stop playing and that it would all go away and he'll figure it out on his own. But that did not happen.
So the important thing is, I know a lot of you have commented that you have similar concerns, or you're concerned that you'll meet a man that plays video games, or that you are a guy and you're afraid no girl is going to take you seriously because you play video games. The compromise is important. To be able to compromise, you need to be able to understand the other side. That goes both ways, and it comes down to communication. Easily one of the most important things in a relationship is being able to communicate. So for Mackenzie, she said that video games in her mind were just bad. Just a vice that needed to be eliminated before you can continue in your eternal progression. For me, I grew up with a lot of brothers, and we played video games together. That's part of how we bonded.
When we say video games, we mean like computer games, phone games, like
console games.
Console games. So all encompassing all of that.
But I guess more specifically, it would be those bigger name console games like Halo or Call of Duty or.
You don't play those though.
No, I'm not really a console gamer. There's those big name PC games that have been going around like Fortnite or League of Legends or World of Warcraft. Like that's the stereotype. I feel like if someone does fit into the stereotype, it probably makes it worse.
Yeah.
Like it's one thing, if they play a lot of games, but all the games they play are on their phone, then you're not going to complain about, oh my gosh, my boyfriend just plays video games all the time. No, you're going to complain. He's on his phone constantly. And in your mind, it's going to be a completely different problem. It's not an unrelated problem. And you can't bin it, you can't stereotype it, because if you're doing that, you won't be able to understand. You won't be in a position where you're willing to try to appreciate the other side. But anyway, for me at least, it was that growing up, I played video games with my brothers. We just enjoyed playing multiplayer games together. Playing against each other, that kind of thing. And then when we got older and we all left the house, that became the only way that we had to stay in touch. And so we still played fairly often, and we found games online, new games that we could play together where we could still stay in touch and still bond even though we were separated across distances. And so that became important to me for a couple reasons. I wanted to be able to maintain this strong relationship that I had with my siblings. And also, for me, video games were relaxing. They are, it's set out, it's calculated very well to be goals, and you have these rules to follow to be able to accomplish these goals, and it gives you this sense of fulfillment. That's the appeal, the attraction of video games. But, you know, definitely we're not just going to sit here and defend video games entirely or generally, because they can be bad, certainly. But I would certainly... Hey,
hi, Cody.
Cody. I would certainly put forward that if you're not willing to view video games in a positive light, then you're also not in a position to be able to reprove someone who is using them irresponsibly, for a very general and politically correct way to put it.
And we're talking about video games, but this can really be applied to anything. We've talked about it before, that sports are along the same lines. Like, you can have a spouse that's playing sports all the time, and it's what brings them enjoyment and fulfills them, and it's exciting for them, and it's a stress relief for them, right? But as a society, we don't view sports the same way we view video games. We see sports as good because it's physical and it's the norm, whereas video games are so new relatively as a society compared to sports. And because, they're just sitting in front of the TV or the computer all day and all of this stuff. But I've learned a lot about it. But anyways, so for Nick, when we got married, that was his perspective, was that it was a stress relief, it was fun, it was a way to keep in touch with his brothers, because he had only been home like 5 months from your mission.
6 months.
6 months. So like,
I've been home 6 months.
He hadn't been home very long from his mission, and so it was very important to him to reestablish and grow that relationship with his brothers. This was all stuff that at the time, like, I didn't know, and I didn't understand it. And so that led to probably a few very important conversations.
Mm-hmm. So for everyone just joining us, thanks for tuning in. If any questions or anything unclear comes up, don't be afraid to ask questions. We're definitely willing to interact. We want to make sure that our message is getting across. To touch on those conversations that Kenzie was referring to, one of the significant ones definitely was when we talked about sports and really tried to dig down to what was the core of the problem, sift past the stereotypes, sift past the generalizations. Thanks, Cody. We like our baby. You gotta give a shout out to the baby, because he's really cute. Daniel's awesome.
He's sleeping though. But...
He is sleeping, or else he'd be here. He'd be giving his 2 cents. But I made the comparison to sports, where I said that, you know, she didn't like that I was taking this time in the evenings away from our time together to be able to spend time with my brothers, and I made the comparison that, you know, if I was into sports, or I have a brother-in-law that's really into basketball, you know, another stereotype is for newly married husbands to still want to spend as much time with their friends and the bros, you know, go play ball with the boys every evening. But that accomplishes the exact same thing. It's taking time away from the spouse. It's, you know, still trying to do something that's stress relieving and bonding with people close to you. But other than that, it amounts to the same thing. You know, how would you feel if your husband came home and you hadn't seen him all day, and immediately he puts shoes on and some basketball shorts and heads out to the court, versus him just like locking himself away in his room and playing video games? You know, it's not the same activity, but the effect on the relationship can be the same. And that was something that I guess was important for us both to understand, that, okay, it's not necessarily the video games. You know, video games were our situation, but there were deeper principles that we needed to learn as a couple.
And it went both ways. I mean, there's like things that I love to do and enjoy doing, and having that same perspective that if I was doing them all the time, it was taking away from our time. And that's, at the beginning of our marriage, is what bothered me the most, was that we weren't getting time together like I thought we should have been. because we were newly married and I didn't see him all day. And I was like, no, it's my time to see you and to hang out with you and to get to know you and to play with you. And so we finally had to sit down and really talk about it and be like, I had to tell him, this is what's bothering me, okay? Like, I don't get to see you. I'm really bothered that you're spending all this time with your brothers and not with me. You know, I don't like video games, and here's why. And they listed off all the reasons that I just thought they were brainless and dumb and unimportant, and that he could be doing better things with his time. And anyways, and he finally, you know, he explained to me, like he said, we broke it down, but he also talked about, you know, that it was his stress relief, that it is that communication with his brothers, that he hadn't seen them for 2 years and really talked to them. And this was his opportunity to get to know them. And that for him, the video games that he specifically plays are very, like, they're analytical, they're logical, they have goals, they have purposes. He doesn't play a video game that's just mindless. I think he hates those ones usually. Like, they have to be something that he's actually using his brain to learn from. And so those were things.
That's actually something that's good to point out.
Yeah.
In fact, so but before we get too much further into that, I'd go back and say, if you're faced with this kind of issue, again, regardless of what it is, in our case it was video games, so we'll continue to use that example. But how do you go about starting to fix it? How do you go about addressing that problem? Well, we talked about how it's important to try to understand the other person's point of view, where your spouse is coming from or your significant other. Mm-hmm. And honestly, Kenzie was fantastic at this.
True that.
Why isn't it showing the whole message?
Oh, thanks.
Well, thanks, Robin. We appreciate that. So I really, really appreciated how Kenzie handled the situation. Even though we talked about, you know, at first she was
not handling it
kind
well.
of stonewalling to a point. She was keeping everything inside, not telling me about it, I guess assuming that I would just know and it would
go away.
Like psychically just bother me. I don't know. My spidey senses would tell me that the wife was unhappy. Those don't develop for like a year or so, you know.
I don't even think we're to that point. We're not there yet.
But what Mackenzie did was she decided, well, I guess first we had a conversation about, you know, it's not just the video games. Video games themselves aren't inherently bad. And once she understood that, she felt that she needed to understand more my perspective on them. And she was talking about the more analytical games. Kenzie said that she thought video games were brain dead and rot your cells and everything that your grandparents
people just sit there and
you.
just play them and don't learn anything. That's what I thought.
This was around the time that me and my brothers were playing a game called Factorio.
Not a brainless game.
I don't think anyone currently viewing has ever played Factorio or heard of it.
If you have, like, drop an emoji because we'll be impressed.
So I'm studying chemical engineering. I'd say that engineers have a very specific mindset, and Factorio is made for engineers. You optimize everything. It's all about automation and building this factory to be able to accomplish these goals and continue growing and like you can math the crap out of that game. Like it can get incredibly intellectual if you let it. So I think showing this to Mackenzie and starting to explain a little bit of what was going on with all of these flashy lights on the screen, Jane's
like, I know what that game is.
about because I was playing with her husband, my brother. We played Factorio a lot together, and she'll know you can math the crap out of that game. So there are games that are like that. They're not always. And I'd argue that the vast majority of them are not brain dead. If they were, they wouldn't have any real appeal. And Kenzie was willing to try to understand what that appeal was for me. And I really appreciated that. And I think that was probably one of the first steps that helped a lot. And the other thing was she even tried playing some games with me. Mm-hmm. And I tried really hard. I wasn't just like, these are my favorite games, let's play them. I tried really hard to find new games that I thought Mackenzie would like. And
and
I
games
hope
that we could
helped
play
as well.
together.
Yeah.
Like he wasn't just like, here's the game, go play it. He was like, I found a game that I think you'd really enjoy, but we can play it together. So one, we were gonna get that time together. Two, I was gonna get to see things more from his perspective. And that really helped. Like, I still am not the biggest into video games. They're just not my thing at all. But I have a better understanding and a better appreciation for what they can do. There are some that I do enjoy. Like, I love playing Pharaoh. If you've ever played that one. Or Maple Story. That one's also fun. So, but we play them together. So that was one thing. I think it's important to note that, yes, as a society, men kind of get slapped on the face with this whole video game thing, and women don't like video games. That's pretty much the stereotype, right? Women don't like it, men like it, they play it. Woman gets upset, causes problems. And in our case, that was the case, right? That's kind of how we saw it. But it could be different for your relationships. It could be, it doesn't even have to be video games. It could be something else. It could be more like the wife spends too much time doing something and the husband. But the points that we want to get across are definitely that learning to understand where one another is coming from. And when you're having that conversation of like, here's my point of view, here's your point of view, don't have it with the idea that I am right and you are wrong. Like, in fact, something that
always works.
Yeah.
Always.
Something that's helped us a lot is for both of us to come to the table assuming we're both wrong more than we are right. Because then we're more humble and more teachable to what the other person's point of view is. And it helps us just not cause that friction to happen and that arguing. We've never argued because we try to discuss and have actual discussions. They can get a little heated, but if it gets... Anyways, but that
can be a whole nother video.
That's a whole nother video, for sure.
Another great place to start for any similar kind of problem... Hi. Is if in any serious relationship, like we talked about communication, we talked about trying to understand your significant other, but also if you're in a significant enough relationship, understanding your partner's love language can be really helpful.
That's another video too.
And really just coming, it does come back to understanding emotionally. Kenzie talked about the stereotype that men tend to get more sucked into video games than women do. Well, from a psychological perspective, that makes a lot of sense. Men take on the role of protector, and so they get a lot of fulfillment from the competitive nature of a lot of video games, like Call of Duty or the battle royales that are going around recently. That makes sense. Not all men are that way. Some women are that way, but if you don't understand that nature or that side of your partner, then it's harder to understand them fully. For Mackenzie, I could never have been able to compromise or fully understand this problem that she had with video games until I understood that her principal love language is quality time. And so the fact that she was missing that quality time with me was pretty significant to her and was part of what was causing a lot of the problems.
Mm-hmm. So, and we did not figure this out in the first couple months. That's when it became an issue and we started talking about it. But even just recently, we've had to start kind of having more boundaries, more kind of, not rules, but one of the things... Expectations, that's the word. So within, literally the last couple months, we decided that Friday night is date night, and that he can't play video games Friday night. Doesn't always happen. We're not the best at it, because sometimes Friday night happens and life's just crazy. And, if he has a test or something and it's really thrown him off, then it's okay, you should play, because you'll de-stress. But that's like one of the things is like we know that Friday nights, the first thing is that it's our time. Like no video games, just that it's date night. Another thing, kind of crazy, but quality time, us time, happens before video games. So if he's going to play with his brothers that night, I need my like 5 minutes, 10 minutes of quality time before he can play. Because if he goes and just starts playing and I kind of assume we're going to get time that night together and we don't, then it causes a lot of problems. So those are just some of the things that for us we've set boundaries to try and help balance that video games in the marriage and that quality time that I need. And so obviously we're still working on it. We're not perfect, but we wanted to share just kind of where we've been at, because some of you know I've been posting on Instagram and trying to find out people's, I just blanked on the word, perspectives, their stories. And this is a pretty common concern in marriages is video games, and in relationships in general. So
I would add that another thing that can really help with regards to boundaries, and like we said, we set aside Friday night date night. One of the things that really helps with is the expectation that I have, even, the day or several days before. Like, I wake up Friday morning and I'm not thinking, ooh, I'm so excited to play this video game with my brothers or accomplish this goal in this other video game, whatever. Because I know ahead of time that evening is going to be our date night. And so I'm planning more to spend time with Mackenzie. I would really emphasize, it doesn't have to be one day a week. It can be several days a week, whatever you feel is the best way to balance it. But those expectations are a bigger deal than I think we often realize, because the disappointment that can arise, like probably the biggest issue for Mackenzie was she would get excited and look forward to spending time with me. And then when I went off to play video games instead, she was disappointed. She wasn't getting what she was looking forward to. Her expectations weren't being met. And that can make a huge difference. If I have the expectation that I want to play video games that evening and I'm looking forward to that, and am ultimately disappointed for whatever reason, like Kenzie needs me or our baby needs me and I'm not able to play for whatever reason, then I noticed that. I noticed that it's a lot harder for me to be happy. It's a lot harder for me to be engaged, to be there. And I'm sure Kenzie notices that because it affects our quality time together. Similarly, though, and this, I guess, is a slightly unrelated note, the compromise between us was important, because just by my nature, and we had to learn this about each other, if I'm not able to play video games, I don't have that stress relief. And we certainly could find another. I'm not saying there's only one way to relieve stress, and there are other activities that you can do, whether it is sports or whatever you like. But for me, it's video games, and that's worked for us. But if there are times when I'm not able to play video games for long stretches of time, especially if it's because of school and I'm already stressed, if we try to set apart quality time, it just doesn't really work. It's not fulfilling for Mackenzie. She doesn't get that same fulfillment from our quality time because I have so much stress. So that's another thing to keep in mind as you're looking for a compromise.
So, if you can't guess, just kidding. So it is one of the things that we are really stressing is that it is expectations, understanding, and communication with it. Dang it, I had a thought. Now it's gone. But anyways, so if you have any questions, feel free to comment. We just really wanted to share our story with it in hopes that it can be helpful for somebody else. We know it's not easy. Like I said earlier, we're still trying to figure it out some days of how to balance just life in general. But, you know, I'm still learning a lot about video games. I've learned that it's actually a community. There are freaking like sports and competitions in the video game world, and we watch GDQ, is that what it's called? If you've ever heard of GDQ, feel free to drop an emoji or like it, because that's also something probably a lot of people haven't heard about. I've never heard about it.
I hadn't heard about it.
It's like, that's true. But there's this whole community. There's people, this is where a lot of people actually meet and they become friends and they build relationships for people that, you know, don't fit into the sports world or don't fit into the different kind of acceptable niches or groups of whatnot. And so there's still a lot to learn, but...
So at the end of the day, if following the stereotype that it tends to be the men that are playing the video games and the women that are unhappy with it, the summation of our advice would probably be for the wife or for the woman, that understanding goes a long way, that willingness to be understanding and to try to compromise and to admit that, you know, maybe this isn't the evil vice and the eighth sin that just needs to be eradicated. For the men, though, for if you are the one playing the video games or the sports or whatever it might be, understand that might not be your highest priority. You do kind of need to take that self-reflection, and I know I did. I was kind of had to weigh my priorities against how much time I was assigning to each one, and I did realize that I admitted I was probably giving more time to video games than I was to my wife and my family, even though I knew that, you know, Kenzie was certainly my highest priority, and so she should be getting more of my attention and definitely more of my care than these video games were. But being able to come to that compromise, at least for us, where I'm able to use video games as a tool to de-stress after work and school, stay in touch and bond with my siblings, and it kind of becomes a tool to put me in a better position to serve Mackenzie, to be there for her, to kind of make that a more enriching quality time that we do spend together. And I'd say that overall it has strengthened our relationship in a number of ways.
Yep, that's for sure. So that's just what we wanted to share with you guys tonight. If you ever do have any questions or concerns, like, feel free to reach out to us. We're always more than happy to give our 2 cents, but to help you out. I do want to acknowledge that just like anything else, yes, video games can become a problem. They can be an addiction. If it is to that kind of point and that's your biggest concerns, then it's okay to reach out to your bishop, counselor, or anybody to work through that as well, because it will be a huge benefit to your relationships if you can have better priorities, if you can better understand and love each other in that way. And yeah, so thank you to everybody that watched, especially those of you that stuck around like the majority of the time. Go you. But yeah, also, if there's anything else you'd ever like to hear us talk about, we love sharing our opinions about things. If you know him, you know he does. So we have a few other things we'd like to share, just because it's not just because we're like, haha, we know everything, but it's really because we just want other people to be able to learn, and maybe it can benefit you in any way. So if there's ever anything that you're like, you know, I just want to understand this better, science, you want to know anything science, he'll teach you everything you need to know.
I won't do your homework for you.
No. But
I could, but I won't.
no, he doesn't have time for that. Sorry, that's my time. Anyways, okay. Thanks everyone for watching. Have a great rest of your Sunday and see ya.